If you've been working on your abandonment and attachment issues for a while, yet you still keep attracting toxic and unhealthy relationships, this is why. Talk therapy and top-down modalities don't address the core of the trauma that keeps the pattern in play where it lies in the body. They skim the surface. They're really helpful for creating meaning, to help you understand and reorganize your cognition around the origin story of your pattern. But what keeps you stuck in the cycle is unhealed wounds that formed pre-verbally in childhood when you were super young. So any kind of top-down work isn't going to actually address the root of the trauma. Your core wound is frozen energy that can only be addressed by sensation, emotion, non-verbal perception, and somatic awareness. And you might think, cool, I'll just go do a bunch of somatic exercises and somatic work like breath work and I'll be cured. No, I'm going to show you what actually taps into your core wound and allows you to heal it. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to give you a tool you can use today to start your healing. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Amy and I help women who are sick of attracting the same kinds of toxic relationships again and again, feel stuck in it, and I help them by healing their relationship to themselves, their core wounds that live in the body, so that they can feel confident and happy on their own and their authentic true self in love. And if this sounds like you, please subscribe to my channel and click the bell notification because I do post new videos every week. Now, before we begin, if you want to know how to work with me inside Heal Your Heart School, stick around to the end of this lesson and I'll show you then. Now, if you're stuck in a cycle of toxic relationships and the same pattern and dynamic keeps playing out again and again, you've probably come to realize that there is one common denominator in all of those relationships, and that is you. And, you know, this is a situation where your picker is broken, or worse, your wound is actually making the decisions for you. In fact, it actually takes over and you feel like you have no control when you go into these relationships. These relationships often start with a whirlwind, with a lot of love bombing. It's very overwhelming. The chemical high is incredible, and you don't actually feel like you have a choice because the connection and chemistry is so great. And then because of this incredible sort of story and romance around it, you find yourself obsessing about them, fantasizing about the potential of the relationship. And then when it becomes unhealthy, you find yourself chasing breadcrumbs, putting up with their unhealthy or toxic traits, like it might be cheating, lying, you know, manipulating you, or even abuse. And most people are just going to leave in this situation, right? But you have a maladaptive blueprint that means you need to stay. There is something in you, an energy in you that's chasing them, trying to make it work, that's overcompensating and being overly compassionate for the things that they're doing. You feel like you can really see behind them. You can see the little boy hurting there. And this is an inappropriate amount of loyalty, and the dynamic becomes toxic. Now, if you've done therapy, you've likely then unpacked, perhaps, or maybe not, where this pattern comes from and where the dynamic to tend to put up with red flags, to, you know, chase emotionally unavailable or avoidant people comes from. And likely you are reliving a dynamic you had as a child with a primary caregiver where they were emotionally unavailable, and in order to get love and connection, which was a primal survival instinct for you, you did absolutely everything in order to chase them and get love and pursue them and prove to them you're worthy of love, which is the same internal dynamic you do when you're in a toxic relationship. And in therapy, you understand and you know all of this in your mind, right? Yet it doesn't stop the urge and the craving and the desire when you're either triggered by them or when you meet someone who seems really amazing. You might be thinking, oh, I need to make sure I'm not reliving that same dynamic again. In your mind, you're kind of looking out for it. There's this overwhelming urge, and then 3, 4, 5 months, maybe a year down the track, you realize they're not who you thought they were, and that there was some level of internal gaslighting going on where you weren't seeing their true appearance, their true red flags. And this is the problem with the cycle as it happens. You then feel out of control in your responses, like someone else is in the steering wheel. You don't know why this keeps happening to you. And this reinforces your internal shame and the narrative of the original wound, which is keeping you stuck in the cycle. So let me explain that. So when I talk about top-down healing work, I'm talking about talk therapy. I'm talking about, you know, any of the modalities that involve you thinking and really understanding from the level of the mind. And this can also include journaling and meditation and any kind of focus on our cognition around our meaning, our origin story, and what has happened. It's useful to improve self-awareness. It's useful to have insight into the past and to create new meaning and story around it, because meaning is very important to our development as human beings, right? But however, these modalities are what I call a neck up approach, right? They kind of just stick with what is happening in here in the head. And these modalities rarely address the effects and the energy of the trauma that's hidden in the subconscious, or that is actually living in the body in terms of the sensations, feelings, and energies, any of that that's associated with trauma. Now, you might have chronic pain, you might have a chronic illness, and there's this part of you wondering whether that's actually coming from the trauma that you've lived in your childhood and lived in your relationships, and you've been getting physical attention about that, and you've been getting therapy, but you haven't sort of joined the two dots. And literally, trauma, when it's stored and hidden in the body and isn't clear, it metastasizes and freezes in the body and can cause chronic illness, chronic pain, chronic inflammation. Now, the reason it's hidden, the reason it's been stuck down there and frozen is because of a very intelligent mechanism we have to push things we can't feel and understand down into the body, because we just can't process it. And when we were children, we couldn't process it at all. And at the moment, if trauma is running your life and therapy isn't helping it, you just haven't learned the skills and the ability to process it and heal it at the level of the body, which is what I'm going to show you in a minute. But the problem with top-down therapy is that it's kind of like just addressing the symptoms above the surface rather than actually looking at the roots and the cause of those things. So if you think of a tree that starts to have brown leaves and starts to have some kind of disease going on, you don't treat the actual leaves, right? You treat the roots and the soil and the nourishment beneath it, because that's actually where the problem starts. So again, that's where top therapy can really let us down, where we're constantly only treating the symptoms on the surface. Meanwhile, the pattern keeps happening, right? You feel out of control. You keep attracting these types of relationships. You feel like there's something wrong with you or something broken with you. And gosh, even therapy hasn't worked. It must be that bad, right? Therapy in this way can hinder your progress even more, because it can reinforce this original core wound story that there's something wrong with you. There isn't. You just haven't learned the type of healing work that addresses abandonment and attachment issues from the core, from the root of the issue. And that is what I call bottom-up healing work. And this is, by definition, where we start from the body. This is addressing the sensory and physiological manifestations of trauma as they live in the body, in terms of a feeling sense and in terms of locating the energy and working with it in a feeling and non-verbal emotional sense. And the reason it's non-verbal is because often when we first experience abandonment or sense abandonment, we are very, very young, 2, 3, 4 years of age. And we didn't have the ability to speak. We didn't have those cognitive functions fully developed yet, but we still felt those feelings of abandonment. So we have to actually go back to that way of speaking to our internal selves. But top-down healing work is like trying to give a university lecturer to a 4-year-old in order to help them heal. They're just not going to get it, right? So why would we do that to ourselves? So your trauma is at a very young developmental age. So complex concepts and connections in your mind just don't work at all to heal it. Now, a big sign that you have these physical symptoms going on in your body of an attachment or abandonment wound is that you are having strong chronic illnesses that just don't seem to go away. I'm not a doctor, but the correlation between the number of women I speak to that have this kind of history, particularly that started in childhood, and chronic illness is just huge. Another sign is that, you kind of have this strong emotion bubbling at the surface, and you might cry at the drop of a hat when you think of a circumstance of being abandoned or rejected in your life, or perhaps when you just watch it happen in a movie or something. These kinds of strong physical responses that are just really bubbling at the surface means you have what I call an abandonment wound. If you want to dive into more about what an abandonment wound is, I have an entire video on that here video I suggest you watch next. So what actual type of bottom-up healing work works? Because like I said, if you just go and Google somatic therapy, you're going to be throwing spaghetti at the wall. Somatic is just referring to work with the body. So, yoga is somatic work, and it is helpful to learn yoga because body awareness is going to connect yourself to your emotions and allow you to kind of get the ball rolling on being reconnected to the body in a safe way. But the release with yoga is sporadic. It's not something that you can really kind of gauge or track. It's really just when your body is ready to do that with that particular pose. I did find it helpful, but I just only found it helpful for sort of the first few layers of the onion. You can do things like shaking therapy, breath work, or even plant medicine, right? That's going to allow you to have a big release, but it can be dangerous because you can flood your system and get overwhelmed, get outside of your window of tolerance. And the problem with that is you can traumatize yourself even more. I don't have the statistics on that, but there is little ability to really self-track that. You're being guided by someone else to help you through the process. They're keeping you safe. I understand that. And yes, of course, you can stop breathing and you can stop shaking to bring yourself out of it, but typically it can have an effect of opening Pandora's box all in one go and flooding our system in the same way. So with somatic healing of these deep wounds, there is a need for simple, practical steps you can take to chip away at the edges of your trauma and allow the layer of the onion to come off when it's ready, but in a self-guided, conscious way. That also allows for self-regulation, right? Allowing you to stay within your window of tolerance. And this is exactly what I teach in Heal Your Heart School. And it's similar to parts work, but we are focusing on the body rather than the stories and relationships and the clutter in the mind of all the internal parts. So what I call this is energetic parts work. And you've probably heard of your inner child. You might have done inner child work already. And believe it or not, you actually have a whole ecosystem of inner children or inner parts within you that work together to keep the abandonment wound and the abandonment narrative in place subconsciously in the body. So you've got your inner critic, your inner firefighter, inner exile, inner perfectionist, inner rebel, inner saboteur, inner protector, a whole family, and they'll be different ages, they'll have different preferences, they have even kind of different personalities when you start to dive into them. We don't have multiple personality disorder. This is just part of the regular human experience, but when we experience trauma, this is exacerbated, and they're all protecting your core abandonment wound, which is the most vulnerable part within you that can burst through the surface with strong emotions anytime you're triggered, and you can just feel like your whole system is flooded. So they're sort of all working in place to keep you contained. Now, when you're stuck in a cycle of attracting toxic relationships, your inner child, your wounded inner child, has her sticky hands on the steering wheel. I love Terry Real, right? It's your inner child that's in control, and you, the parent, is in the back seat, which of course is problematic because you've got this very young version of yourself making life's choices for you, and your wounded inner child is out of control. She's young, she's naive, she's scared, she makes poor choices, she's very focused on only getting her immediate needs met, and then she doesn't really take into consideration more complex thoughts because as a 4 or a 3-year-old, you just didn't have that ability to think like that. Now, if you've done IFS or parts work, IFS stands for internal family systems, you're not new to this, but the wounded part is so young that talking or understanding or having a narrative with your internal family won't actually access the core of her pain, right? It is a very helpful therapy, but there is a somatic component to it. This is where we focus on where in the body you're feeling that energetic manifestation of this part, and you're tracking what comes up then in your mind as a result of that. So we're going from the bottom up to the mind. This is really difficult because our tendency is to stay in our head. This is actually a coping mechanism we all have to over-intellectualize and overthink things in order to get through something, and that is actually your inner saboteur at work. And this is why, again, therapy can get you stuck, because you feel like you're circling the drain of what actually is the problem, but you keep getting stuck in stories, getting stuck in information, in thinking and talking and writing and reading, rather than actually hitting the nail on the head where the core wound is. So I want to give you a tool to walk away with today so that you can actually get get started on hitting this core wound energy in your body, if this all resonates with you. And this is a 2-step process to healing your core wound energetically from where it is in the body. The first step is recognition. Recognition of the inner part that's coming up. Not necessarily is it going to be the inner child. It might be your inner critic, your inner perfectionist. Most likely it will be one of those gatekeepers. But you need to get to know how it appears and how it feels in your body. When your inner critic comes up, you start speaking harshly to yourself. Recognize your inner critic is loud and is at the front, and then listen to your body and pay attention to what's going on in your body, right? So when that happens, recognize where in the body are you feeling any kind of a sensation when that thought, when that, internal self-speak happens, and work deeply with that sensation, all the nuance of it, like really investigate it. What is the texture? What is the temperature? What is the size? Does it have a color? These aren't going to make a whole lot of sense to you because we're going into our feeling sense. We're dropping into what we are leaning into, what our intuition might be telling us. And a lot of us aren't used to being in this part of us. We want to kind of drop back into our mind and get out of it because it feels a little bit weird. But this is the area we actually need to start to chip away at this core frozen energy. The best place to get started on this is when you have strong emotions, okay? So when you get triggered, when something happens, I want you to notice what's going on in your body and just simply track it. Like a commentator at a sports game, literally, where in the body is it? What does it feel like? What is the texture of it? Is it moving? Is it static? Does it feel numb? What is actually, see if you can kind of separate from the discomfort of the emotion and actually just focus on the manifestation side. The second step of this tool is permission. So recognition, then permission. And permission is about giving yourself permission to feel that feeling in the body, to allow those thoughts to be and to allow whatever is going on with you to be there, okay? And this is really allowing this internal part, whatever part it is, to feel seen, heard, recognized, understood, really loved, nourished, all the things you didn't get when you were a child. This process of permission is literally giving you yourself what you didn't get when you were a child and so needed. All right. So this might look like just an internal gesture of just love, of kindness, of understanding. And whatever that is going to look like for you doesn't have to be verbal at all. It can just simply be feeling. Or if you want to get started and this all sounds a little bit weird, just say out loud, thank you for being here. You make sense. I can understand completely where you're coming from, right? Permission is freeing for that part, and it counteracts our natural instinct, which is what got us in this trouble in the first place, which is to push it down, okay? We've been pushing down our entire life because we haven't been able to tolerate these uncomfortable feelings. We now need to do the opposite and reverse of that. So that is what step 2, permission, is all about. Now you might be thinking, hang on, why on earth do I want to say to my inner critic, I can understand where you're coming from, right? Because you might be thinking, well, I don't want to magnify these feelings inside of myself. This is the contradiction. You won't actually be magnetizing what the inner critic is saying, okay? The inner critic actually deeply wants to feel seen, heard, loved, and understood, okay? By listening to it and by leaning into that critical inner voice, you're actually going to be giving it what it needs, and it will get smaller and smaller. Trust me on that. Try it. Let me know in the comments below. This is a real contradiction, but once you start to do it a few times, you'll know what I mean. The other question I get a heap is that, what if I can't actually connect to my body and feel? Like, am I a total lost cause? And I just want to tell you that that is totally normal, right? Being cut off from the neck, just operating in this space is a totally normal thing for you, particularly if you've experienced trauma. And guess what? It doesn't mean that your body isn't feeling things and there's things going on. It just means that you are at the moment cut off from those sensations, or you only really pay attention to your body when something really big happens, like a big trigger, a big emotional swell, or a big chronic pain. I want you to understand that this is a protective mechanism, and it actually served to keep you safe when you were young. Very, very intelligent. Doesn't serve you anymore, right? So we actually just need to chip away at feeling things. So just start with where you're at. Start with those biggest feelings and triggers that come for you. Like I said, you've been desensitized to the nuance of your body and how your body shows its signals. So you're only going to really hear the big ones. So just start there. Start with step one, recognition. Recognition is huge. And then give yourself permission for it to be there, for that part to speak and say and feel whatever it needs to feel, and just go through the process again and again. When I started going through this process, I was going through a big breakup and I was just riding waves of grief, and they were very big. They were very, very hard to ignore. And it was great practice ground to just recognizing when something's coming up and giving permission to that feeling, that energy to come up. And it always passed in that. It will never get stuck if you do these two steps correctly. The only way it will get stuck is if you don't give it permission to be felt, heard, seen, and understood, which is what you've been doing most of your life, which is how we've ended up with this core wound in the body. All right. So eventually, through this process, you're going to learn to feel and identify more subtle emotions, and you will eventually actually start to crack the nut on the core of the wound. So when you're doing this, please make sure you stay within your window of tolerance. Please make sure you do have someone with you, either a coach, therapist, a friend. Don't do this on your own, but practice these subtly, look after yourself, stay safe, and it's going to make a massive difference on your healing journey. So in this video, I've given you these specific tools to clear the trauma, but there's actually a 3-step process that I teach in order to break the cycle of toxic relationships. And I teach it in my free webinar, the 3 steps to self-love after a toxic relationship ends. You would really benefit from going into there. And we actually do this tool in that webinar. So just click the link below to join me there. I also have a Facebook group if you want to come meet me live. And if you do want to know how to work with me directly inside Heal Your Heart School, there is an application to join the program. Just click the link and a calendar will pop up so you can book a call with me and my team there. If you have any comments or questions on this video, I would love to talk with you about this. This is a particular topic I'm passionate about. I don't want to be demonizing therapy because I think therapy is very helpful, but I'd be super curious about your opinion. Just comment below. And please click the like button just to help me out in the algorithm. And here are some next step videos for you to watch so you can move one step closer to having a beautiful relationship to yourself. And for now, I will see you in the next video.